right?
Mm.
So that's what
Right.
fans are looking for, is like, how are we going to build upon what we had last year? And on top of that, how are we going to have not only a better defense than what we had last year, but the defense last year is not the standard. We do not want to be better than that defense. We want to be better than the defense 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you know? So
Mhm.
last year should not be the standard. So I'm just going to go through real quick and list off the signings that the Bengals have made this offseason so far. I
Shoot.
do have X open in case something big does happen while we're recording here. But so
Massive.
running back Samaje Perine signed a 2-year deal worth up to $3.8 million with the Bengals. Glad to have him back. Okay. Um Kind of random. I kind of feel like Duke Tobin like woke up, made that deal, and then was like, okay, that'll keep the fans happy, and went back to bed.
And and I was gonna say nothing against Piran, but I mean it's not like a blockbuster signing in my opinion to have him extended. I mean he's a great player and he adds depth to your running back lineup, but still it's just
Yeah, maybe he's better than Herbert at pass blocking, which Khalil Herbert went to the Colts today too. So, I mean, that we traded for Herbert, let Herbert walk in the offseason. That's a fine deal. I'm not mad at it. I still think we need to draft a pass blocking running back, Cam Scattaboo. But we'll see. We'll see. T. Higgins, he got franchise tagged. That extension talk is still ongoing. Mike Gesicki, he re-signed a 3-year, $25.5 million deal with $12 million in year one. And I like this contract, but also something that like Joe Goodberry and James Rapine and some bigger Bengals media heads have been talking about is how like the Bengals front load contracts, and like for a lot of teams, it's like, okay, yeah, they're trying to balance this out, but the Bengals tend to do it to make it look like they're using up the cap space. And so I wonder if that's what they're doing here. But Mike Gesicki, he's real excited to be back. I like him. I think he's a good player. I'm glad he's back. Joe Burrow wanted him back. I'm good with it. Tanner Hudson, again, okay. 1-year contract. Cody Ford. I'm glad he's back. A good depth piece, kind of played all over the line last year with injuries. Not a starter by any means, but he signed a 2-year contract. Edge Joseph Asai returned on a 1-year deal worth $7 million. I'm interested to see what he has because he's kind of one of those guys who Lou never really played. He sat behind Sam Hubbard. BJ Hill re-signed. Glad to have him back. 3-year, $33 million. Then this is kind of where we get into some of the newer names. The 2 new names to Cincinnati Bengals fans are defensive lineman TJ Slayton, who was with the Green Bay Packers, agreed to a 2-year, $15.1 million deal. And then linebacker Oren Burks, who is with the Eagles. I've talked to some Eagles fans. They're really excited about the move. They said Bengals fans should be excited about the move, I should say. But he's not like a starting caliber linebacker that necessarily, and his contract reflects that. It's 2-year, $5 million. And then after that, we get back to the guys who are returning. Cornerback Marco Wilson, 1-year deal. I'm pretty sure we got him off waivers from the Cardinals last year. And then we extended the long snapper, Cal Adamitis, who's been there forever. And so, like nothing really sticks out there to me as like, wow, this is what the Bengals are doing. They're going all in. They recognize that they have Joe Burrow as their quarterback. They saw the season Joe Burrow had last season, and they are like, we can win now. This doesn't feel like a team that's going all into me. This feels like a team that doesn't know how to build a team. And they are falling into the stereotypes that people have talked about the Bengals for years, about them being cheap, about them being a poverty franchise. They're not going after these guys. It's been made clear to them. If they would literally sit down and watch Bengals YouTubers, very smart Bengals YouTubers, who have told them how to build the team realistically and overpaying some of these players to just, be like making sure you can actually get them in the building, you can build a team here. Like Will Fries, he didn't get signed. He's in Minnesota now. Kevin Zeitler, he's not coming back to the Bengals. He was at the Lions, free agent. I forget where. Oh, he's signing with the Titans. We've let all these guards walk. There's been a ton of good defensive linemen, defensive tackles that could have come in. Who knows if the Bengals even talked to them? Haven't heard any real rumors about any of that. In this stuff, it's getting shallow. And Duke Tobin just appears to be doing nothing other than signing these bargain players, which, that's been what the Bengals have been said to do. That's been the stereotype. They don't spend money. And in the past, that hasn't been true. In the past, the Bengals have spent a ton of money. The Bengals spent a ton of money on defense. It didn't work out, but they spent a ton of money. This year, they're not spending any money. And it's frustrating for fans. Fans are getting upset because they are watching. They've been through this before with Carson Palmer. They didn't sign to keep certain guys. We watched Carson Palmer leave. You watched Andrew Whitworth leave. You're potentially about to watch Trey Hendrickson leave. Maybe T. Higgins. Jesse Bates. This is just a recurring thing. And it's because the front office waited. Yeah. If the front office would have paid Jamar Chase last season, it would have been a lot cheaper. If the front office would have paid Jamar Chase 2 weeks ago, it would have been about $10 million cheaper. But Duke Tobin, and this is negotiation 101. You never negotiate in public. But Duke Tobin at the Combine said, by the end of it all, Jamar Chase will be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. At the Combine, that would have been about $30 million, I believe. Now Myles Garrett signed a $40 million extension.
Yep.
And you know what Jamar Chase's...
he's eyeing up a $50 million a year contract right now.
His camp should have that on recording, and they should be playing that at every single negotiation meeting. And there should be Duke cannot say, in my mind, he cannot say, well, that was back then. Why didn't you sign him back then when he was asking for the structure? The price goes up. The longer you wait for all these guys, the price went up with Jesse Bates when you waited. The price went up with Trey Hendrickson when you waited. It's bad. It's bad business. And I feel like Duke Tobin. So back in, I want to say 2020, the 2020 offseason. I could be wrong. Maybe it was 2021. The Bengals had Carl Lawson. And he was a free agent, and people were like, we got to re-sign him. And Duke Tobin said no. They didn't re-sign him. And he went and got Trey Hendrickson on a deal in free agency. And DJ Reader on a deal in free agency. DJ Reader was a bit more, but Trey Hendrickson was a deal. And obviously, DJ Reader played out well. Trey Hendrickson played out well. And I think Duke Tobin is still trying to chase that high of getting that deal. He thinks he's smarter than what he is. Trey Hendrickson is probably the greatest free agency signing in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that's a fair argument to make. But just because you make that signing doesn't mean you get to say, okay, I'm going to go find the next one. Sign good football players. Draft good football players. It really comes down to that. It's not that, don't overcomplicate things. It's like Jonathan Allen is out there. We need a pass rush. Jonathan Allen can provide that. Let's go get a pass rush. It's not too difficult. I was curious, I was looking at what was the Bengals, how did the Bengals sacks look last season on defense total? So they had 36 total sacks as a defense last season. 17 and a half of those were Trey Hendrickson. So almost half. 18 is half. He had 17 and a half. Joseph Asai had 5. Joseph Asai is back. So right now we have 22 and a half of those sacks rostered. BJ Hill is back. He had 3. Okay. So we have 25.5 sacks rostered of our 36. Chris Jenkins Jr. had 3. Okay, 28 and a half are on the roster. Do we know if Chris Jenkins Jr. is going to take a step in year 2? No, we don't. Sam Hubbard retired. He had 2. McKinley Jackson had 1. Another second-year player. Does he take a step? I don't know. Cedric Johnson had 1. Sheldon Rankins had 1. Isn't on the team. Dax Hill had 1, but he's a cornerback, so can you rely on him to keep getting sacks? Zach Carter had half a sack. He isn't on the team anymore. Cam Taylor-Britt's another cornerback who had half a sack. And Jay Tufele is, I believe, a free agent as well. Likely not going to be re-signed, and he's off the team. So, really, the Bengals have no pass rush here. They have Joseph Asai, brought him back. BJ Hill. Miles Murphy doesn't have any sacks. He didn't really get to play last year, but what are we relying on here? And TJ Slayton, I've looked at him. He's a run defender. Chris Jenkins, run defender. McKinley Jackson, run defender. There's guys with potential here, but that's what we're working with. If Trey Hendrickson leaves, you have like 1, 4, 4, 7. You have 12 sacks on the roster of 36. Right. If Trey Hendrickson leaves, you have no pass rush. Maybe Joseph Asai. Maybe Chris Jenkins if he takes another step. What are you doing? You have now made it in. There's 2 positions the Bengals really need: guard and defensive interior pass rusher. If you let Trey Hendrickson go, you need an edge then too. And you can't get all those in the first round. You're not going to get all those in the first round. You have pretty much made every single Bengals mock draft I have seen this week has had Kenneth Grant from Michigan being the guy, because that is really the only guy who you can go with. And you can say he's going to be a pass rusher who's going to be effective day 1. But this defense, as it stands right now, is worse than what it was last year. And it was abysmal last year. I do not know what Duke took. This is the most excited I've been to watch the Cincinnati Bengals in the Joe Burrow era. You know, normally I'm a guy who's like, oh yeah, you know, the Bengals, we're going to go out there, we're going to kill everyone, you know, even on weeks where it's not likely. I'm like, we got this. I don't feel that way right now. I do not feel that way at all. And I don't blame the players who are kind of just, you know, like, what are we doing? Because I don't know what we're doing.
And that's the thing. That's the concerning part. I mean, in Cincinnati, I think that's kind of the issue that you have been talking about. And it's really unfortunate because, as you mentioned, there are so many talented individuals that have these solutions that are not professionals. And somehow they have built rosters. I'm sure probably even people that play Madden have built better rosters than Tobin is doing. And that's really unfortunate because the Bengals just a couple of years ago were in the Super Bowl and you guys had high hopes. Just a couple of years ago, right after that Super Bowl, you lost only by 3 to the Kansas City Chiefs. And since then, it's just been kind of snowballing. Obviously, Burrow was hurt 2 years ago, but last year should have been that wake-up call. And instead, it just kind of showed how poor the defense really was. And it shows how great your offense is. Your offense is so explosive, so high-powered that, honestly, it could give a really good team a run for their money. But the problem is your defense can't hold up. And that's the issue. Because you guys, with that offense, if you guys just had a little bit better of a defense, I feel like you guys against the Philadelphia Eagles would have been a much better Super Bowl than what we witnessed this year.
Even if you look at a lot of these teams, they may not have players that are necessarily producing sacks, but they're producing quarterback pressures. And the Bengals didn't even have that. So even to just have a quarterback pressure would be, that would be an upgrade. And it's like a lot of the guys we're looking at that we wanted the Bengals to go after, they're not signing these huge contracts that it's like, okay, yeah, I'm glad the Bengals didn't sign them. No, they're signing very reasonable contracts that I would have paid. Deo Odeingbo, I forget where he went. Left the Colts. I'm trying to find him here. Find his contract. He's a guy who he's not going to be like some insane sack monster, but he is going to produce quarterback pressures, and
Mhm.
that affects the game. Yeah, I forget what his contract was, but I remember just looking at it. And, he got signed by the Bears. 3-year, $48 million with $32 million fully guaranteed. I would have paid that for him. Maybe some people argue it's a bit of an overpay. I would have paid that. Maybe the guarantee's a little high, which I could see that being why the Bengals wouldn't have, because they don't do that. Or defensive lineman Leve Onwuzurike. He re-signed back with the Lions, 1 year, $5.5 million, coming off injury. Like, you could have done that. Roy Lopez, another guy who signed with the Lions. Like, there are guys out there. He signed for 1 year, $4.65 million. Just like, if you're gonna take a swing on someone who looks promising. Don't take a swing on someone who Bengals fans like all are collectively going like, who's that? Like, and all NFL fans are going, who's that? What are you doing? And like, you
Gotta
talk about
make
the
that
offense being
splash.
good. It's great with the offense being. I love that the offense is good. But at what point does Joe request a trade? Because Joe has been out there and he's been saying this is how you re-sign Jamar T and Trey and Mike Gesicki, and you have money left over for free agency. He's already gone on podcasts and said that too.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, and that's the concerning part too, is because you guys have that franchise guy. You have the weapons around him. You have even one defensive piece. You just need to add defensive players. And honestly, this kind of reminds me in some aspects of the way the Steelers were back in the 2010s with the Killer Bees. You had Brown and Bell. You had a really high-powered offense, a great offensive line. I mean, I know your offensive line isn't in the same boat, but hear me out here. It was a very similar situation, and you didn't have the defense, and a contract couldn't get done, and Le'Veon Bell sat out. And then Antonio Brown, a year or two later, got mad. He left, and it just turned into a whole different team. And now it's a very defensive-oriented team with a lackluster offense that's slowly building itself back. But when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals itself, I think it is a note of concern, just because when it comes to Joe Burrow, you guys haven't really had that guy in a very long time. I don't know if ever. I don't know. I mean, obviously there was Carson Palmer for that brief stint that was decent, but he left. Then you had Andy Dalton, who was Andy Dalton. I don't know where you would put him on the spectrum of like good and bad quarterbacks, but he was there.
He is the average line.
He is the standard of average quarterbacks. He is average. So, and you open up a dictionary and he comes up as average quarterback. But nonetheless, here nor there, Andy Dalton was your other franchise guy. Now you have a guy like Joe Burrow, who is a legendary quarterback. Any team would love to have him that really needs a quarterback. And there's plenty and that would love to have Joe Burrow on their squad. And he knows that. And it's unfortunate because right now it's not worth a concern because you still got the guys, you still got Chase and stuff, but there is going to be a time where it is of concern. And it could be as soon as next year. Unfortunately.
Yeah. We've spent 20 minutes on the Bengals, much of it just be me just ranting. But there are other teams in the NFL. Let's head on over to Pittsburgh.